Howdy small fries and welcome to my longest original species video yet. Yep, it's longer than my video about kobolds and the Mochi Raptor double feature. If you watch this whole video, you'll see all 5 parts of my videos on Avali from history to factions, so no need to double dip and watch the original parts after this. Well, unless you want to help me eat this month. Originally I did this in multiple parts in hope of getting in contact with the creator by the end of the video's process, but they're mostly on just for affinity, and using for affinity is kind of like cock and ball torture, so I kind of gave up there. Anyway, it's not a big deal. It would have just made the video a little bit longer and I would have been able to get away with calling it the Avali movie, but anyway, here is What Are Avali? The almost a movie, but not quite. Howdy, small fries. Look, I'm waving. I can move my arms now. I can move my arms and now you're all done for. I'll take over this planet in no time as soon as I stop procrastinating, but that's a job for another day. Today in this video, we're talking about Avali. I don't know how much I'm going to use my hands. I don't think I'm going to use them that much. But this tracker was so cheap, I kind of had to jump on it while I could. Anyway, this video's been a long time coming. People have been requesting me to make a video about Avali since the beginning of this channel, really. And they're always surprised to learn just how deep the lore actually is, and why I haven't, tackled this video sooner. The vast majority of original species could be covered in a YouTube short, usually because they're made for VR chat avatars and not for roleplay or games, so lore usually isn't important. This species is very different. From the beginning, Avali were created with lore in mind immediately after creation. Avali, like Protogen and Circles, have massive communities that contain a mix of furry and non-furry fans with their own original characters. Species like this tend to have a ton of lore, and Avali isn't any different. This series on Avali is going to be done in 5 parts. You're watching the first one, History. And I don't usually do a history section, but this species is exceptionally well documented, which is the total opposite of most of the original species that I've covered. And the history lines up nicely with my experience because of video games. Then we'll do a biology section, a tech section, a culture section, and factions. Each of these subjects are multiple pages long just on their own. You're probably already familiar with the Avali. You can search them up, and you probably have, and the results you probably got were the wiki and the Starbound mod. You probably stayed away from the wiki because of just how long it is. Wikis rarely make for light reads after all, and Avali were popularized within their own self-made spaces. They didn't have the influence of other original species groups that were there at the time, that popularized the design guides that I praise so much. Avali weren't originally made for everyone to have an OC of them. They were made as a playable species for the video game Spore. If you don't remember Spore because it was 16 years ago and some of you were a fetus at that time, chances are you more likely know it from YouTubers like Game Grumps, Jacksepticeye,
Top of the morning to you laddies, my name is Jacksepticeye and welcome to Spore!
and Monster Factory's Justin and Griffin McElroy playing it.
Obviously, this is the very first real big publisher press conference.
But even then, those Let's Plays are almost a decade old. A decade old? That can't be right. It's so long ago, and I remember it so well, like it was yesterday. Don't mind me. I'm just gonna go have a quick cry as I'm dealing with being acutely aware of my own mortality. It's perfectly fine that I'm past my prime and missed out on my original YouTube dream of being a Let's Player. Now I actually have to work to make videos. Anyway, Spore is old, and this was around the time many original species were just hitting the scene. In Spore, the Avali were a species called the Iubati. That's how it's pronounced. You might have googled this and checked it out for yourself and saw it spelled like this. I too thought it was Lubati, because the capital I looks like a lowercase l. Isn't English such a great language with no confusing letters like C, D, E, B, G? It's so simple. It's so simple. There's no letters that sound alike, and there's no letters that look alike. That's actually not the only mistake with the name. This isn't even the original name of the species, as they were going to be called the Ilisi. But Ryujin, the creator, didn't know you can't change the species name once it's submitted to the Spore website. Now, for how they look, you can see here that they share many similarities in design with the Avali, but they added the funk of Spore's creative quirks. No creature in Spore looks natural, like it belongs. They all look like they're made from mismatched assets. The main difference here between them and the Avali is Avali have an almost upright humanoid posture, whereas the Iubati are more raptor-like in posture. This is because Ryujin was doing a bit of speculative evolution. She liked raptors and decided to craft a universe around the idea of raptors gaining human-like intelligence. But the base game of Spore doesn't have anything in the way of story. It's a series of sections played as a single-celled organism, animalistic life, tribal, city-dwelling, then spacefaring sections, each with different gameplay. The game was designed to be open-ended, where you make your own story, although this was before the popularity of storytelling engine games like Dwarf Fortress and RimWorld, which could have led by example and could have probably helped Spore be a better game. But Spore's had a lot of issues with it. The team leader behind the project promised a ton, and barely any of it came to fruition. If you're familiar with Peter Molyneux of Fable fame, or the guy behind No Man's Sky, they all promised way too much, way more than they could actually deliver, and then when the game came out, none of it was in it, and people were kind of upset. But Spore later added the Galactic Adventures expansion, which was to help with the storytelling aspects a little more. It was kind of like a Dungeons & Dragons like DM's toolkit, where you could create stages and adventures and people would play through them. As you've seen from some of the gameplay I put on screen, Spore was more like Civilization. At first you had direct control over your character, but after the animalistic stage you controlled settlements. Galactic Adventures was letting you have that control back, like back when you were an amoeba. With this pack, Ryujin made the EU body adventure called Whom Gods Destroy. Very edgy. Very late OOs. During this time, the lore was expanded upon greatly. A few of the main features of the modern lore originated here with things like some of their biology and neural augments. There were a few more updates during this time, like multiple updates to the appearance and the addition of the EU body guardian, a secondary inhabitant of their homeworld. These EU body are quadrupeds. They chose to take a different route in their evolution and became quadrupeds and weren't gifted with intelligence the way the raptor-like EU body are. Funnily enough though, these quadrupeds are used as mounts. Despite being closely related and considered being the same species to other EU body, they're ridden around like horses. That'd be like a human riding King Kong into battle. While that sounds really cool, and now I want a Battle-rilla of my own, I think it's a bit of a funny choice. It's like Goofy being anthropomorphic while Pluto still eats out of a dog bowl. The adventure itself, Whom Gods Destroy, has a fitting, edgy title to its story. The story in the mission is somewhat dark itself, and I'm about to spoil it a bit for you. I'm sure you're all very mad at me for spoiling a 16-year-old fan-made adventure in a dead game. In WGD, you play a captain who is investigating a planet, and on it there is a group of EU body living there. All of the inhabitants have implants made from a crystal that is localized to this planet. It's discovered that the crystal is sending out signals to their brains. The adventure ends with you killing everyone and leaving the planet as a sole survivor. Basically, it's the plot of Dead Space and many other cosmic horror titles. I considered playing it myself, but I'm not about to spend $20 on an expansion pack for a dead game, plus another $20 for a dead game. Just before our time skip to Starbound, where Avali are most commonly recognized, Ryujin changed the homeworld name to Avalon and submitted some new EU body models with the new name Avali. Fast forward to 2013, we have the early access release of Starbound. It was fully released in 2016, but it was in early access for about 3 years. I actually bought into this game early on when it was still a crowdfunding project on their website, and I only regret it immensely. Starbound was essentially Terraria, but you played in space and there were lots of cool alien species. It was procedurally generated with procedurally generated planets. It did what No Man's Sky promised to do before No Man's Sky was even a glint in its creator's eye. Personally, I prefer a handcrafted gaming experience. Procedural generation can make game development much quicker, and I think it has its place in roguelike games, but it typically lacks surprise or the fun and intelligent design of a handcrafted experience. They lack style. Games like Oblivion, Morrowind, and Skyrim are so praised, and Fallout games of course too, are so praised because of their handcrafted experience. Not because a bunch of randomized assets fit in the perfect order to make something interesting happen this time. But everyone was doing it at this time, and some great games used it. The games also featured a story mode and side quest, and was even developed by someone who had worked on Terraria. It had the potential to be as good as Terraria. Some people were even calling it the Terraria killer. In retrospect, that's kind of hilarious. But while Starbound was good, it never really caught on, thanks to the developers Chucklefish mishandling the game and eventually abandoning it. To give you an idea of just how bad Chucklefish is, here's a long list of just the bad decisions that they made. Some of Chucklefish's crappiness includes unpaid volunteers, unpaid minor labor, verbal abuse of those minors, lots of unpaid labor in all aspects of the game, including code, music, and art. Toby Fox even made music that was eventually rejected because He wasn't using the chat channel enough. Abusive lead designer. Promised a release date a year after beta that was never delivered on. Lackluster beta that felt more like a proof of concept. Overpromised. Underdeveloped. Secretly changed the release date. Refused to deliver refunds. Constantly replacing staff. Published multiple games instead of finishing the one they promised. And removed content when transitioning to release. They basically screwed up so bad that indie devs who were publishing with them left the company. Even the creator of Stardew Valley, Concerned Ape, cut ties with them. This is a huge deal because publishers will usually fund a game, and a lot of time, having a publisher is the only way a video game can get released. So Concerned Ape was saying, I'd rather risk Stardew not existing than publish through Chucklefish. I had to info dump all of that because it's very related to our story about Avali. Ryujin made the Avali mod during the beta of Starbound, and this is where they were updated to their modern form, and this mod was huge among the player base. It's just absolutely huge. It was one of the most used and most downloaded mods for Starbound. Like I said earlier, if you Google Avali, you'll see mentions of its relation to Starbound. Since this was the beta, and Avali totally fit the vibes of the game, fans asked Chucklefish to put Avali in Starbound. Some fiends weren't keen on it though, because they didn't like the idea that the top mod was a furry one. Things change, but they all just stay the same, you know? Chucklefish listened though, and contacted Ryujin about putting Avali in. Chucklefish wanted to own Avali as an IP, as well as own all legal rights to them. When Ryujin asked what their offer was, how much Ryujin would receive for giving their IP over to them, Chucklefish responded with, quote-unquote, "Oh, we can't pay you. It'd be for exposure, getting your name in the credits of a major title." You know, I'm kinda glad this game died. Makes sense why I mentioned all that junk though now, right? Well, Ryujin said no, because you should, to quote-unquote offers like this. Avali took time to make, and was a byproduct of Ryujin's own creative mind. Only Ryujin could have made them, and their reward was going to be zilch? Nada? Nothing? Sometimes I'll take art or models from people in exchange for sponsoring a video, but they pay with their art instead of paying with money. This wasn't that, and Chucklefish could have afforded to pay her. Their Kickstarter made 230 USD in the first day, and they received lots of funding after the fact. They only wanted to put her username in the credits. I'd give a big old hearty f*** you to Chucklefish if it were me. You'd honestly get a lot more exposure for telling people what they tried than you would from putting your character in their game. Before this, Avali had an overhaul of their lore, as well as making them fit better within the Starbound universe. In this lore, Avali was treated as more of a primitive race that was brought up to the starfaring scene due to interference from another race. This mod was also pretty expensive with unique Avali equipment and sprites. Ryujin was thorough, and a lot of care went into it, and I think that's what resonated so much with the fanbase. The honesty and genuine care, love, and passion for the species and its mod during a time when the game was lacking much of that. Lacking the care, love, passion, attention, and the content. Had Chucklefish gotten control of Avali, they may have been loved just as much in that time, but in the long run, I don't think they would have lasted. I don't think anyone would be talking about them now. Gaming companies have a special way of taking passions and ruining them, or sucking the love from a project entirely. After this, Ryujin stayed mostly quiet, and since then the control of Avali have mostly been handled by the fans. Ryujin wanted the species to stay open, but this is something I've talked about before. If you don't control the lore, the fans will make it for you. This can be for the better and for the worse. If you don't stay on top of the lore, the community will handle it for you, and you might not like the direction they take it in, and that's happened a lot with Avali's lore. One such issue was the wiki division. A wiki exists both on Wikidot and Fandom. It appears that the Fandom one is the preferred wiki as it's updated more regularly. It seems like fans won out on this one, and Fandom became the home for the species, while the Wikidot page is yet to be finished. This war of canon versus fanon came to a head with reproduction. Without too many spoilers for the reproduction section of biology and to prevent multiple videos from being demonetized, let's just say some people wanted them to have a very specific way of reproduction, and each person had their own theory for how they get down. This resulted in a wiki war of edits, including vandalism. This was really only something that should have been decided on by the creator. But, like I said, earlier Avali weren't made to be an original species in the same way as creatures like Mano-Kits, Dutch Angel Dragons, and the like. Those species had ideas for how reproduction was handled early on. Things like reproduction didn't matter much in video games, as you won't see any of that in action. They have since agreed upon on how they do it, They're like chickens, and they do it like how chickens do. I can't say more. My Omegaverse video finally got demonetized, so I think YouTube's onto me. Anyway, from this point on, Avali has been relatively untouched. Most information on Avalis come from their inclusion and content within the Starbound mod, but they've gone on to be included in Stellaris, RimWorld, Second Life, VR Chat, and more, all handled by the community. Since then, Ryujin has stepped away from the species. Ryujin had always intended for the species to be under fan control, and it had been from early on. Avali has been a free project that Ryujin worked on from the beginning, but like the rest of us, she has to eat and pay bills and has to move on to other things. But now Avali is almost entirely fandom-owned, with the exception being to monetization of the species. You're allowed to use Avali in any paid work as long as you credit Ryujin. One such work is Todd's Guide to Avali, a 100-page guide to the lore of Avali and creation. This was made without consultation from Ryujin and is far too long for me to do a video on, unless people, maybe sub to my Patreon or, I don't know, ask enough. Many use it, and I don't see the harm in it as long as Ryujin doesn't have an issue with it herself. But my videos personally won't be using Todd's Guide as a source. But where the species really divides off of, and in my opinion suffers from lack of creator intervention, is the VR chat, model, and Discord communities. Since the creation of VR chat models for these species, they all have separate Discords, further dividing the community. It's great that each model introduces new people to the community, but without a formalized gathering place treated as the sort of canon community like an Avali Discord, we're seeing a splintering of the community. Every model has its own Discord community tied to the creators of the models, resulting in numerous sub-communities of Avali. When micro-communities like this pop up, it leads to the creation of subcultures with their own takes on the lore, design, and tones of the community. What one considers fine, others won't, and since they don't have one specific place to call home, you can expect to see a division in the future. It's fine to expand on the lore and create new lore, but with so many communities, some may feel more entitled to the ownership of certain lore. Basically, what I fear is further splintering of the community and further changes from the species' canon appearance. It's great that the community is so passionate, but a lack of a leader in charge of everything with set rules will lead to the species either becoming unrecognizable or members factioning off. A species needs rules. It's what defines how a cat is different from a dog. There's some rules. But the community has free reign. So if the community has no rules, then what we call an Avali today could be very different from what an Avali is called a few years from now. That's it for history though. We're in the modern day now. It's amazing how species like this could become so popular when its history was consistently hinged on being the only good thing in a bad game. Spore, while fun and silly for the first hour, was overall a letdown for many people like myself excited for the game. But the EU body was a spark of creativity in the dark, the only thing illuminating this dark cavern. Then Starbound came out, and many considered that to be a disappointment as well. And the Avali arrived, making Starbound a fun experience again. Both games sucked, but Ryujin made them a little bit better for a lot of people, and all it took was some dopey, feathery raptors. Avali biology. Since their beginnings as a spacefaring raptor species, the Avali have gone under countless changes to get to the point where they are now. And with the rise of VR chat models with their own twist on the species, we continue to see changes being made to the species. So what I'm going by here is what's in the official Avali wiki, as that's the closest we'll get to a community standard or canonical design. As you can see here, and probably noticed already, the modern Avali has shed a lot of its original EU body design. No longer sporting a hunched posture, scaly body, short raptor-like arms, beady realistic eyes, sparse feathering, 2 ears, a drooping tail, and instead we have an upright humanoid posture with a body covered in feathers, winged arms, an upright bird-like tail, large black but expressive eyes, twice as many ears, and smaller and significantly less reptilian mouths. I think many of these changes were made to more easily adapt them into the style of Starbound. Making them fit into the humanoid shape makes animating and making their clothing easier. Had they kept the EU body posture, Ryujin probably would have had to go with a double wide sprite, which might not have been done so easily. But Ryujin might have also seen this as an opportunity to design the Avali as she sees fit, since EU body are from Spore, the game, and it's got some pretty weird and severe limitations for character design. You can make almost anything you wanted in that game, but you'd be making concessions in some regard. This was an opportunity for Ryujin to play with their design more, and have a lot more freedom. The wiki says the Avali are closely related to the Earthican dromaeosaur, a theropod or raptor dinosaurian that used to roam the Earthican homeworld in the negative 80th epoch, or 80 million years ago for my human watchers out there. I think aside from the fully feathered body and legs, Avali don't have much visual similarity to its ancestors. But then again, this is a spacefaring species, which would be hundreds of epochs ahead of their ancestors. I doubt humans would look much like their ancestors that far removed too. Avali might look cute, but they're almost entirely alien to Earthicans. You might think they look cute and small, and that's because they are. A tall Avali is a max of 3.5 feet tall, a little over 3 meters, making it possible for a short king to use them as an armrest, and babies are perfectly puntable. This short size and feathers makes it possible for them to fly on low-gravity worlds such as their home world Avalon. But even on a high-gravity planet, they're still something to be feared, as their small size suggests that they use pack tactics. If you do manage to spill some blood on one, you might be surprised to find out that it's not like red Earthican blood, but instead a pale violet color. This is likely because they're not a carbon-based life form like Earthicans. Inside their body runs liquid ammonia. This, alongside their feathers, allow them to stay warm in cold environments. But the inverse applies too. Since their temperature is regulated by their ammonia, they can't live comfortably on planets Earthicans would consider acceptable. This is probably why humans haven't noticed them yet. Planets you consider uninhabitable might be acceptable for species that aren't carbon-based. Earthicans measure their temperature based on the freezing point and boiling point of their most vital resource, dihydrogen monoxide, or water, except for American Earthicans who use their own system. In the Earthican Celsius measurement, 0 degrees is the freezing point of water and 100 degrees is the boiling point of water. But for a species that is primarily composed of ammonia, that changes a bit. Ammonia has a boiling point of -33 Celsius, meaning that your freezer is still 17 degrees too high to accommodate ammonia. But adaptations in the physiology of Avali, like pressure, insulation, and water, has raised ammonia's boiling point a little bit. This means that even on their 50% frozen homeworld, they're still able to freeze in the cold segments and live in the zones of their planet that they consider tropical. But if you put them outside on an Earthican summer day, they might just explode. The internal temperature of an Earthican is 37 degrees Celsius, so you could probably burn one by spitting on them. So if you're ever out exploring the stars and you're invaded by hostile Avali, remember that a super soaker filled with pee would probably do more damage than lead. Remember, when in doubt, whip it out. You think that would be enough, but the wiki goes into extreme detail about everything. There's just as much here about freaky ammonia-based living as there is about the mundane, like their feathers. There are 5 different kinds of feathers on Avali, with each explaining away something. As a suggestion, if you're making original species, this isn't really necessary, and doesn't necessarily add anything. This is getting into the overdoing it territory, but just a little bit. It's not quite as bad as Dutch angel dragons with their muscular skeletal system and all that junk. This is the kind of detail you'd give a creature in a book, where you can sprinkle it throughout the story. I don't think anyone is really curious about all the feather types, but here they are. Upper body feathers are slick and oily in order to protect from snow. Their lower body feathers are light and fluffy in order to keep their body warm. Pulva plumes, specialized down that continuously regenerate, break apart and cover other feathers, powdering them to keep them clean. The feathers on the back of their head are sensitive to heat and will curl when exposed to heat. This doesn't serve much of a purpose, other than styling. The final set of feathers are the long feathers. These are found on the arms and back of the head and contain a bit of blood in the base and shaft of the feather. When plucked, they will bleed. They're not gone forever though, they'll just grow back. And they don't serve a clearly defined purpose within the info here, but are instead suggested to be a very intense gift between Avali. Despite their unique massive eyes, there isn't much info on them, other than they're used in low light. In other situations, their ears are much more useful, using 4 long ears to pick up sounds from many different directions or many different sound sources at once. This heightened sense of hearing gives them a sort of sight without sight. Finally, we're on to one of the most contentious parts of the species, reproduction. This section has been changed and vandalized a lot. People couldn't agree on how they wanted them to be, but here's what they settled on. First, to tell their sexes apart, they follow real-world bird rules. Females have muted tones and speckles, whereas males have bright colors with bands of color across their body. Simply, boys are pretty in the Avali species. But for mating, the down and dirty, the horizontal tango, the beast with 2 backs, the bone zone, or Pound Town, when visiting Pound Town, they do it like Earthican chickens do. Both parties have a cloaca and would reproduce as chickens would, doing what is called a cloacal kiss. I won't go into further detail, but after the egg is fertilized and has some time to gestate, the females lay a large egg. Depending on how much nutrients the egg has, dictates how many babies are in a single egg, but the egg is relatively soft, so it won't be hard for babies to break free. And lastly, Avali put a high priority on the usage of tech in their lives, which is abnormal for a species that is so, in tune with nature. Pretty much every Avali has some level of technology within them, but at the absolute bare minimum, they have a neural implant that creates a sort of augmented reality, letting them interface with hardware found in their daily life, as well as allowing them to interface with medicinal nanites that monitor their health and isolate threatening trauma. Nanites are basically very, very tiny machines. You might have heard of them in other sci-fi stuff, but this advanced technology gives these little bodies a huge advantage. By isolating an infection or damage, they can prevent its spread. Beyond that, some Avali get more advanced tech like cybernetic life support regulators to help live on other planets, prosthetics, and full body replacement. Which might seem a bit extreme to an Earthican, but if you're a soldier, this takes away your many weak points and restricts it to just your head. When you're as small of a target as an Avali is, making your weak points even smaller is a significant advantage. Quite the leap from the Avali at the start of the video, whose biggest weakness was soda that you forgot in your car. Avali technology. Avali Illuminate sit in a unique position in their technological advancements, the Illuminate being the largest factions of the Avali. They're at the exciting point that all humans are still afraid of, the singularity. The singularity is the crossroads where meat and machine meet, where human and machine are no longer a question, but the default. Avali technology pervades every aspect of Avali life, cybernetics replacing limbs and entire bodies, virtual technology capable of replicating simulations indistinguishable from reality, and augmented reality being so commonplace that those without the ability to interact with it would struggle to survive. Even whole portions of their society exist only in the virtual space. This world is called the Nexus. What exactly is the Nexus? It's a powerful network of computers and information linked throughout space with sync crystals. Think of it as the internet, but on an even larger scale than just satellites, Wi-Fi, 5G, and cables. The Nexus itself is accessed through the neural jacks that every Avali has, and nearly every individual uses the Nexus to some degree, through augmented reality or fully fledged virtual reality. And similarly to VR chat, like a lot of this is very similar to VR chat, they represent themselves in these spaces with avatars. Browsing the Nexus works much like the modern internet, but rather than being viewed through a series of pages, the user will experience the Nexus at real locations. Well, real to them. Think metaverse, but not garbage. As a virtual space, travel and movement isn't limited to just walking. Although many Nexus locales use that as their main travel method as it's the most intuitive, but everything on the Nexus is an illusion. Can you tell this was made before VR chat? I wonder if they watched gaming videos like Let's Plays, highlights, funny moments, and stuff like that. If they did, I bet they'd probably watch my channel, Daddyless Behavior, where me and my partners, Mabel, Rook, and Connie, all get together to play games. Then me and Mabel edit them up into funny little videos. You can also meet our cow son, Burger. I'm a shrimp, and Rook's a dog, so he'll find out eventually. Just don't tell Burger that he was adopted. He'll freak out. Anyway, the primary use of the Nexus is for info gathering and processing. It displays information on everything. Wow, they really just took 2 pages worth of text just to say it's the internet, but let's continue. The Nexus can provide raw data as well as complex information like step-by-step directions and 3-dimensional schematics imposed onto the environment. Again, could have been summed up with, it's the internet. They also have something like QR codes to link you to products, advertisements, and notices that are relevant in the real world. They aren't a capitalist society, so this feature is used pretty rarely. You can chat in real time. This sounds like Nintendo when they announced a new feature for their online services that already existed for the past 10 years. You can buy DLC for your games now. You can play old Nintendo games on the Switch's built-in emulator. Crowd claps, cheers, we move on. Let me see if I can find something that isn't just the internet. Virtual spaces that work like... virtual chatting spaces that work like copy shops, forums for info archival, text transcripts, news sites, virtual shopping spaces to try clothes on, physical shops with holograms of clothing, an elevation of the arts. Yeah, this is all just the internet. Can be used for gaming, relaxation, an overabundance of casual games, practice skills. Oh, here's something. The simulations used to practice skills may teach an Avali how to do it, but in real practice might struggle due to a real-world physical limitation. So on these practice worlds, they'll limit a user's ability to match their real-world ability, so that the model's limitations are the same as they're making the process of learning more realistic and natural. But that's the Nexus. It's just the internet plus VR chat. Survival gear. Since the natural environment of their homeworld is very habitable to them, they don't need much in the way of survival gear while on their planet. But should they leave, they need a bit of kit.
For example, on most planets, they require a pressure suit. Depending on the severity of the conditions of the planet, they may need the heavier hard suits to counter the pressure of their environment. These suits also feature thin slits to allow feathers to escape for comfort reasons and don't disrupt the suit too much. There's a great need for thermal regulation though, as the ammonia in their body boils when above -30 Celsius or -23 Fahrenheit in Berger numbers. This temperature regulation is achieved with coolant running in the hard suit or through an implant which cools the body from the inside out. Drones. The definition of drone varies between Earthicans and Avali. A drone for Earthicans is any unmanned remote-controlled air vehicle. They're used to drop bombs, record videos, and deliver packages. For Avali, almost all vehicles are capable of being remote-controlled and unmanned. Their drones use simple AI to work on tasks without much oversight, but when an Avali does call something a drone, it usually means craft that doesn't carry passengers. This can range from machines that are just an inch long to 100 feet long and fully equipped war vehicles. Because of that, drones are visible all over their territories doing just about anything you can think of. Melee weaponry. Avali like to avoid melee combat when possible, but that doesn't mean it's because their weapons are slacking. Avali use weapons called aerotech, and they're basically small printers. The weapons push out lightweight crystalline compounds outwards along a rail that forms the sharp of the blade and tapers to a point. The crystalline structure isn't particularly strong, but it is very sharp. When striking an object, the uppermost layer will shatter and expose a sharper layer below. The top layer shreds, the second layer continues cutting. Since these blades are printed, it's not a big deal if they shatter and splinter, and they can just print more. The blades themselves are also constructed like a box cutter, so if the point gets too dull, it can be snapped off. If an Avali wants the tip to snap, they just need to stab it in and twist the blade, freeing their blade and leaving a chunk in their opponent. This is somewhat similar to how the Makwahisol works. They're wooden planks with obsidian lodged between the boards. Obsidian is very sharp, sharper than a steel razor blade, but fragile, so it cuts when it hits bones and fragments off into the body. According to conquistadors, it could also cut a horse's head off entirely. But this isn't the only weapon in their inventory. More expensive Avali weapons feature high-frequency oscillators, which cause the blades to vibrate at a very high frequency. This creates a sort of sawing-like effect, similar to an electric carving knife. These blades are colloquially known as singing blades. Another Avali weapon is the aerogel. They're much like aerotech blades, using a printing function to make the blade. When not in use, they charge themselves up, getting ready to blast out the next blade. It recommends to practice safe disposal, as even when the blade is ejected, it may remain sharp. Ranged weaponry. Avali weapons are a new world of warfare. Gunpowder? May as well be using stone tools too, caveman. Avali use railgun technology. A railgun uses a series of charged rails to propel a chunk of tungsten. Think of it like several tiny slingshots, launching the tungsten with more velocity with each rail. The projectiles go further, are lighter, smaller, and more importantly, pierce better than the average Earthican gun. The technology scales to all firearm sizes, from the compact handgun to the massive world-destroying cannons on gunships, creating explosions the size of nuclear weapons. Avali personal spacecraft tend to lean more on the side of evasion and travel, avoiding combat when possible. Avali do have warships, as I mentioned before, and those are fully kitted out and usually fully autonomous. Most of the vehicles interface directly with the Avali pilot's neural augments, allowing them to see through the ship as if it was their own eyes, eliminating things like reaction and input time. Lastly, grazers are the primary weapon of Avali space combat fleets. Using an antimatter matrix, they pump up a gamma ray laser. The weapon is capable of striking with little warning or chance of evasion. Even if the initial blast doesn't do much damage, the energy from the blast will cause fires within the ship. Thankfully, this world-ending weapon only works in space and isn't useful for air-to-ground attacks. Sync crystals. These pink crystals are a closely guarded secret, as these crystals allow for the communication over light years of distance and are the basic infrastructure for the Nexus. Imagine if your cell phone could make calls to other star systems. It doesn't help that these crystals are rare, being only available on a singular planet as far as the Avali know. Their modern infrastructure would be non-existent without these babies. These crystals are known for their unique connective properties. Once ripped from the ground, these crystals maintain a strong matching connection, but as a wonderful coincidence, these signals match synaptic signals, making them perfect for neural links. Unfortunately, everything else about the crystals are secret or not known. Augmentation. As previously mentioned, all Avali citizens have some degree of augmentation, the bare minimum being the neural jack used to communicate with the Nexus, and medicinal nanites called Guardian. The Guardian nanites, being the most common augment, are present in the entire Avali population.
Why won't you die? nanomachines, son. They harden in response to physical trauma. You can't hurt me, Jack. What did I just say?
If you made an Avali and you ever said that you've never had work done, well, let's just say you're not as au naturel as you thought you were. Inside your body right now runs several different kinds of medicinal nanites, each continually replicating and destroying pathogens, as well as repairing any damage you sustain. They won't instantly heal damage, but instead accelerate the healing process with the assistance of medical treatment. Avali just need less medical treatment. See, this is how you know these creatures aren't from Earth's America. If Americans tried to introduce these, the medical companies would pay off politicians to institute laws to ban them, so the medical companies could continue to make a few more $billion. The neural augments Avali use to connect to the Nexus consist of a small processor, a couple physical connectors that connect to the brainstem, and lots of filament connecting to several important parts of the brain. This sounds a whole lot like Neuralink. God, I hope it's not like Neuralink. The unit itself does carry some internal memory, but it's mostly used for processing augmented reality, audio, and HUD functionality. While those are among the most common, plenty of Avali get more product to improve their meat machines, often in the form of limb and organ replacement. A lot of times this is because they sustained an injury where the upgrade would not only fix the problem, but improve the body's overall performance. Imagine going to the mechanic because your car's making a humming noise, and they swap out every part on it with top-of-the-line stuff. The humming noise is gone, and now your car's better than ever before. Some will choose to preemptively replace these parts, since, like I said, they're just that much better. Some soldiers even go as far as to replace their entire body from the neck down with cybernetics, but not everything is a one-to-one fit. Some replacements may be bigger or smaller than their original counterparts, and immediately I'm getting images of Avali Space Marines with giant armor and little baby heads. But this means sometimes there's extra space in an Avali's body, and sometimes they'll use this extra space for concealed tools and weapons. Avali culture. Every creature that is capable of speech has a culture. Earthicans, regardless of their location on their planet, all have a culture. Some have cultures based on their locations, others from their religion, and some get their cultures from the communities they participate on in the internet. You might have heard of furries. They're an example of a subculture or a culture one participates in primarily through the internet. Even then, there are smaller cultures with specific sites or applications. Avali aren't any different. Every Avali has a culture of their own. Just like Earthicans, the Avali have customs tied to specific levels in society. They have their culture as a species, specific to their tribes, and they likely have cultures tied to their internet hangouts, or Nexus hangouts. Customs on the societal level tend to revolve around their lack of labor-based economy. Avali live in a world where work isn't required and scarcity isn't an issue anymore. Everyone has their needs met, and labor isn't needed for society to function anymore. Of course, Earthicans are rapidly approaching the automation of labor, but things like socialism and universal basic income are frowned upon in Earthican cultures, where a person's value is tied to the labor that they produce. So it's currently a pipe dream on Earth, and a guess as to whether Earthicans will ever reach this level. At the bottom level of society, we have packs. This is the bottom level as in the smallest portion, not the worst, or, the poorest or anything like that. This is the lower level of the, pyramid. Packs are a term usually referring to a small group of 3 to 6 members engaging in hunting. This term now applies to a group of 3 to 6 Avali who are bonded at a young age. Some species, like the Earthican gerbil, will grow together as a small group and split off to make their own groups. Gerbils are highly territorial, so they rarely let new members into the group that aren't born into it or discovered at a young age. Avali are grouped similarly. This pack will have members of a variety of personal skill sets, but the pack itself will become specialized in a handful of specific tasks, which become their pack's roles. Despite being paired at a young age, it's not often that they're from the same family. This time together with their pack results in incredibly strong packs that are almost dependent on one another. Their care for each other runs so deep that just the loss of one member can effectively neutralize an entire pack in terms of effectiveness. The same can be said for isolation. Good luck getting an Avali to do anything alone. But, like I said with gerbils, replacement of lost pack members doesn't go very well. They're not outwardly hostile to new members, but instead lack the history and genuine connection the original unit had. On the next level, packs turn into tribes. They're big groups that have a shared overall purpose, but aren't often a permanent group, and get dissolved into a colony or join the Illuminate, the government that represents the majority of the Avali. A tribe is sort of like a guild or mercenary group that's created and owned by all participants on the spot. Typically, a tribe is made as a command from higher society as an assignment. They'll pick someone to be leader, and the leader will recruit the crew needed for the assignment. In addition to the promised reward for assignment completion, the tribe is entitled to anything obtained above and beyond the needs of the mission. For example, say I tell you to build a team to make me a sandwich. And upon completion, I will give you a piece of candy, a paperclip, a busted rubber band, and the lint in my pocket. You take the deal for some reason, you think it's a good deal, and while you're making my sandwich, you make enough extra sandwiches for the rest of your team. You'd receive the candy, the paperclip, the busted rubber band, the lint, and any extra sandwiches you made, and I would just receive my sandwich. Above tribes are colonies. Some tribes organize themselves to be near other tribes in order to increase personal production. As per my flawless sandwich example, a tribe who is tasked with making my sandwich would likely find it beneficial to be positioned near a baking tribe, salami tribe, cheese tribe, lettuce tribe, mayo tribe, and if I'm feeling wild, if I'm feeling wacky, hot mustard tribe. This would mean less time spent traveling to get to my very specific ingredients. Should this sandwich making tribe need to be deployed long, they might build facilities to accommodate my sandwich making by making them a colony. The Sera Sandwich Colony. I wrote and recorded this before checking if I had enough sandwich stock footage, so hopefully there's some good variety in the stock footage here. If you want to help me get that sandwich though, you can sub to the Patreon and become a YouTube member. I get some money when you join one of the paid tiers, and I will use that to buy a sandwich or as a bounty for my sandwich colony. They keep asking for lint and rubber bands, and I'm all out. I'm starting to have to give them cash. Anyway, these colonies will create councils, which are like senates, where a leader from each pack, in addition to an illuminate overseer, will administer matters pertaining to the colony. So if a colony member asks if it's okay to include gabagool on my sandwich, the council would rule on it. Overseer Sera didn't request gabagool, but I know she likes it. I think we should include it, as it might be a nice surprise for Overseer Sera. I don't know if my position would actually be called Overseer or something like that, but they would vote on it, and while I think that might personally be too much pork, I would still enjoy it, thank you. If this colony is in place long enough, they'll receive things like Nexus nodes for better connection, FTL communications, resident buildings, long-term supply networks, and the like. This sandwich is really important, so I think they need a good internet connection to source the best sandwich recipe possible. Design and construction. Being as advanced as they are, there isn't much left of their ancient civilizations. This is likely due to Avali being an even more nomadic species in their early existence. Their constant moving led to not needing permanent structures, and if they're designed to fall apart, then time will surely assist with that. The only remaining evidence of ancient civilizations is the mountaintop cities dotting the peaks of their home planet of Avalon. These structures still stand in the absence of people because of their location. Even though they're nomadic, the structure in the tundra needed a foundation to last even a short period. This led to these ancient cities being a permanent fixture. Some of these structures have been destroyed and rebuilt numerous times. Modern Avali are very different despite retaining this somewhat nomadic nature. Their lives, just like their bodies, contain equal measures of technology and natural life. If you've ever camped, you might have a buddy who has to have all the top-of-the-line modern camping equipment, or those families who camp in an RV. It's so modern it seems space-age that it's like, why are you even camping? Like, you have an RV, that's like, your RV is so nice, it's practically just like living in a house. Why are you out here even camping? This isn't camping. Anyway, this is how Avali live. Campers living so top of the line that you can't really call it camping. Portable stoves, synthesizers for music, holographic displays, carbon nanofiber tents to stop bullets, and much more. But the nomadic spirit still lives on with them. They'll build all of their tools and structures with the goal of being simple and as disposable as possible. Everything is made to be packed quick, and tossed away just as quickly. Things like armor and weapons, on the other hand, are pricey and indispensable. Each piece features lots of personal touches, kind of like that water bottle or laptop that you have with all the stickers on it. They might not be custom, but they're each a unique piece that tells you something about the owner. We talked about how they're nomadic, and this is mostly because of the planetary conditions. The planet being a tundra covering the planet makes permanent fixtures pointless. Permanent cities aren't unheard of, but these cities are primarily built on mountains that go high enough to break out of climate limitations. Since these are the few locations where cities can be, they tend to be tightly packed and densely populated. When you can only live on top of mountains, there isn't much room for car-based infrastructure, but these cities don't have much room for dwelling in. Even though the view must be amazing, they instead serve as trading hubs. The arts. You would think that because they can't stay in one place for very long, they wouldn't put much time into something like art. Most traditional art takes up space and would likely last longer than any housing situation they had set up. But all art is fleeting. That's why we build museums and sites to host it. Art is as victim to time as we all are. But remember that Avali live in a society that is post-labor scarcity. Anyone and everyone can engage in the arts. Their version of the internet, the Nexus, also gives them an advantage in learning various forms of art through simulation, tutorials, videos, and shared knowledge. Since they live in a world where, for the most part, one can do what they please, they take the opportunity to practice the arts and express their creativity in everything they do. If they leave a mark, no matter how temporary, they want it to be their mark. Music and performance tends to be a popular art form for them because hearing is one of their most powerful senses. Their large blank eyes have very little use to them. Pretty much every Avali can play an instrument to some degree, or even sing, but visual arts are nearly completely lost on them, only expressing it through their clothing and gear, but with some limitations, as they tend to stick to pack colors and symbols. Cute enough, though, that they add crystals and metal chimes to their clothes to help them provide a distinct sound, unique to them, basically making auditory arts their visual art. This is also pretty useful for them as they can pick a sound out from many sounds. Oracle cult. Cults are typically associated with a negative connotation. This is likely due to cult behaviors in the past 200 Earthican years, but a cult is simply a religion on the smallest possible scale. Let me get some input on this from my Greek mythology YouTube friend Carfunkel, who is definitely not me in a rat costume. Thanks for having me on, Sera. I know I'm a really small channel, so thanks for this opportunity. I just wish you invited me to a place that's a little bit bigger and kind of just standing outside your tank staring at you. It's kind of awkward. I can't fit in a chair that small. Anyway, hello funky people. I'm Carfunkel the Carbuncle. I make videos on mythology, and I run across the term cult a lot. In modern Earthican times, we associate cults with negativity due to dangerous cults like Aum Shinrikyo, who are known for the sarin gas attack in Tokyo in 1995. Or sewer slide cults like Heaven's Gate. But cults before recent times were more of a way of saying this is a group that is part of a small, unrecognized religion, or they worship one specific god out of a pantheon and have their own ways of worshipping them. In ancient Greece, they worshipped a lot of gods referred to as Olympians, Titans, Primordials, and a few others. Some of these deities would have a small following that primarily worshipped them, and they would have their own rules for worshipping them. For example, the cult of Dionysus consisted of satyrs, centaurs, and people. This cult would practice what Dionysus taught: drinking, partying, boning, and other forms of wonderful, wonderful hedonism. Not necessarily evil, and not necessarily good, just regular old worship. The oracle cult within the Avali is much like those of ancient Greek cults. This cult practices something like transhumanism, where they seek to elevate themselves beyond their bodies. Typically, Avali will get a lot of augments, replace limbs, improve organs, and even replace everything from the neck down. But the Oracle cult goes beyond that. They'll get much more extensive neural augmentations, making them capable of communicating without words, as well as other machinery, silently. This gives the appearance to outsiders as possessing omnipotence. Their primary goal is to reach true singularity, the perfect melding of man and machine. If they were to achieve this, they'd effectively own the oracle system, making them effectively gods. Even though this is their goal, they think it's best to put it off for a while. If the Nexus and Oracle were to achieve free will, it could have very bad results for the rest of the meat machines out there. Weirdly, Sera said this is the only mention of the Oracle system that she's seen at this point, but later on it gets brought up more. Religion and philosophy. Mythology is just religion, so I've got some experience here too. Avali in the early days believed that everything living or otherwise contains a spirit or essence. You might be familiar with this concept. It's called animism. It's the belief that everything has a soul, agency, and free will. When you name your stuffed animals, give them a personality, or even a little backstory, you're practicing some sort of animism. You're giving a soul to it. Ancient Avali also believed that owners of these objects impart a piece of their soul onto the object. It's kind of beautiful because it suggests that we all have influence over our own worlds, and we leave a piece of ourselves in every interaction, meaning that each person and object is the summation of multiple experiences with multiple people, creating a sense of unity within the objects and people themselves. They don't believe in animism so much anymore, and practice of religions of other species is discouraged by the Illuminate. They're worried about the underlying messages within these religions having an influence on their culture and beliefs that have worked for them, which I think many Earthicans can agree with. Religion tends to be a major part of people's lives, with each one of them having core rules to live by, as well as their own culture's lessons and morals. A religion that may support capitalistic beliefs or putting one above the many may interfere with the daily lives of the Illuminate in a way that could be harmful for their entire world. In short, they don't like single-god religions, and wouldn't touch a Bible with a 10-foot pole. Some go as far as to be offended by the concept of a single-god religion. And that's the end of my role here. Remember to check out my YouTube for more stuff like this. I make videos about mythology, and I just made another iceberg video. Sera's bringing me back to Earth. Make sure to subscribe! That was Carfunkel. They said something about having pizza rolls in the oven and needing to go. Good timing, though, as next we'll be going over factions. Avali factions. The Avali aren't a one-size-fits-all race or species. Each location an Avali is from can vary greatly between locations, cultures, subcultures, and like humans, even what parts of their internet they frequent. Each location Avali is from can vary in language greatly, ranging from having their own words to being almost an entirely new language. On Earth, there's a country called India. They don't speak one shared language. Instead, India has the second most spoken languages on the planet. India has over 100 languages, and Avali are kind of like that. Having many different dialects, languages, and the like, there are many different factions of Avali, and language varies by colony, but here are the ones you're most likely to encounter. The Avali Illuminate. Recursive and isolationists, the Illuminate represent the majority of the Avali species. They're not only the largest collective of Avali, being made of almost half of the entire Avali population, but they're also the most powerful. Outsiders treat them as the main Avali population, and this is likely due to their size, power, and being seated as the ruling faction of the Avali homeworld Avalon. Their culture is typically as varied as the species itself, and things like architecture isn't important as long as it serves the function it's designed for. Because of this isolation and separation of many underneath the Illuminate, it makes it difficult to keep an eye on everything like culture and architecture. The Illuminate government is a scientific meritocracy. A meritocracy is a system where people are given positions based on their ability. The more qualified you are, and the more you show you're qualified, the more responsibility you're given. Imagine your boss actually cared that you're a hard worker, that you showed up early, you did your job above and beyond the requirements, and you never missed a day. So they promoted you frequently, or gave you frequent raises for doing a good job, or didn't make a big deal if you missed a day or two. The Illuminate functions as a meritocracy and is highly centralized, but they like tribes maintaining their freedom and self-governance. The more a tribe handles without Illuminate intervention, the less resources they need to waste on keeping them in line. The upper levels of administration are handled with an AI system called the Oracle system. This isn't a rampant AI, though. Currently, it's bound by a lot of rules. But this AI does what AI does best. It breaks everything down to number-like growth potentials and handles redundancies like supply. Speaking of tech, the citizens are fond of cybernetics, virtual reality, and augmented reality technology, so much so that the majority of development goes into the virtual side that exists parallel to their physical. Amongst that, they're also a spacefaring faction. The Illuminate are constantly shipping new Avali Adventure Corps to explore the universe. These AAC ships are equipped with a larger variety of more sensitive scientific equipment and are designed to be more stealthy in order to avoid detection of species that aren't ready for the space race yet. But outside of avoiding species of lower tech levels, they occasionally make contact with other spacefaring species. Independent worlds. Outside of the Illuminate-controlled space are the independent worlds. These are colonies and societies that reject being part of the Illuminate, or were outside of the Illuminate space when making their society. But don't assume that just because they're independent that they're small. There are as many independent colonies as there are Illuminate ones, but they've splintered off into many groups. This is kind of like what the state of the fanbase currently is. With no Illuminate governing body, the majority of the fanbase are divided into numerous subgroups based on which 3D model maker's Discord they're in. Culture in the independent worlds are much more diverse than Illuminate colonies. These independent groups often come into contact or live with other species and adopt their customs and values. But they differ in a more important way. Since they lack the Oracle network, they lack the infrastructure, law, and policing of the Illuminate, meaning laws and the like are handled by the individual governing bodies of the colonies. In some cases, these groups adopt a Wild West approach to management. Just like with culture, their tech level varies by colony. These Avali even lack access to the Nexus, meaning they lack the many sophisticated technologies the Illuminate guard so closely. Imagine having to choose between freedom or internet access. Rogue tribes. Tribes who don't serve the Illuminate or owe allegiance to a colony. They live by their own rules. This, of course, means that the culture and tech would vary entirely based on the individuals within the tribes. Some focus more on their nomadic origins and go where need takes them, and others are likely to go where currency calls. Some even take up the high seas, the high space seas. They're space pirates. In terms of tech, most tribes are limited only to what they can find and afford. Since they refuse to participate in a society, they don't benefit from things like a reliable paycheck. With that, we've reached the end of our time with the Avali species. This might be where the info we have on them ends, but they have a whole future ahead of them. So much of the existing lore is entirely unrecognizable from their origins, so maybe one day in the future, we'll return to see what happens in a few years. I'm very interested from a scientific viewpoint to see what happens when an original species community has full control over their future and direction. But for that, we'll just have to wait and see. If you want to support what I do for free, remember to like, comment, subscribe, and check out my other channels, Daddyless Behavior, where I play video games with my partners, and Carfunkle, where I make videos about mythology and urban myths. If you like original species, then mythology is right up your alley. Carfunkle isn't partnered yet, so I'd really like to get it there. Lastly, catch us live on twitch.tv/daddylessbehavior. There you can watch me, Mabel, Rook, and Connie play video games together. And if you want to support us and what I do, but you got $1 to spare, check out our Patreon. It's seriously just $1. Thank you everyone for watching, and thanks to my patrons on Patreon. They make it possible for me to make almost movies like this that document the various species of the furry fandom. Without them, I'd be relying on ad revenue and taking garbage sponsors like a sex toy company that wanted to pay me in Dakimakuras. True story. So thanks again to Rask, Ver, WildKitty69, Beeve, Jesse For Real, Bait, Cryptid Artha, Sly, Colorado Blue, Vaderson, Linky, Kit Chimera, Malding Brick, and everyone who ever bought my merch. Those little keychain doodads I keep sending out. It seriously would not be possible for me to make these videos without their help and your help at home. Before I started this script, my GPU actually broke and I needed to get a new one, so this Patreon money and ad revenue and Malding Brick's help most of all made it possible for me to continue making videos. So thanks for watching, and keep it trimple.